Yes, so here we go. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Saturday Club morning meeting. And today we have a very interesting speaker and a very interesting topic too. And of course, no need to actually formally introduce Dr. Divyesbhai Mehta. He is known amongst all Baroda medical fraternity, very well known for his work in Baroda for a decade or so. So to formally introduce him, he's a consultant hemato-oncologist in USA. Good to know that he is graduate from Baroda Medical College in the batch of 1971. Board certified American Board of Internal Medicine and Hematology in USA. He worked in Baroda from 85 to 2001 and actually, in fact, established many good things in Baroda. He was affiliated with Bilal Amin, KGP Chilhan Hospital, Mayo Hospital. And I very vividly remember how he established the blood bank in Baroda with component therapy for the first time. Very good memories of Divyesbhai working in Baroda. He's chairman hemato-oncology. He was chairman hemato-oncology division, University of Illinois, Chicago from 2003 to 2011. Then he was professor of medicine and chairman hemato-oncology, University of Arizona, MIHS systems from 2011 to 2018. And of course, he's a very multifaceted personality and a very, very popular speaker. So over to you, Divyesbhai, about 40-45 minutes for you to talk about early Indians, who are we? Are the answers apparent in population genetics? A very interesting topic, very much look forward to listening to you. So over to you, Divyesbhai, for next
Thank you very much.
minutes, and then we'll keep some 10 minutes for interaction.
Yes, absolutely. My talk will be over between 30 and 40 minutes, and we'll leave the last 10-15 minutes to, because it is such a interesting topic that I hope we will have time for discussion. Before I screen share, all of you please mute your audio, so other sounds in your environment do not disturb. Silence your phones. That's another. I already did mine because things will keep popping up. And I also want to basically tell you that the slides you're going to see have lots of art, and all of that art is mine. I am the artist. In my retirement, I retired 3-4 years ago, and in my retirement, one of the pleasures of my life has been to start painting. And as I started painting, I discovered that I had bronchial asthma, and the acrylic, the paint fumes, the benzene made my nights horrible. And finally, we decided that, if I wanted to continue painting, I switched to iPad and I switched to Apple Pen. And all that you see today, the last 10 years of tremendous effort to learn art, not on paper, not with brush, not with paint, but on iPad. And that's where some of the hours that I have free now go. I will now come to the topic. Who are we? Who were the early Indians? Who, not just a question of my father or my grandfather or my great-grandfather. I can probably know the story of last 150 years and trace who were where. But going back to where we were, and going back to when the Homo sapiens began their journey, who were we and how did we get into India? And what's the story of so many different kinds of languages, so many different kinds of skin colors, ethnicities, food allergies? How did we all come about? For all these years, the answer to this was in archaeology and in carbon dating and in linguistics. But in 2000, when the human genome was deciphered, finally genetics arrived to put a finality on what was found. And that is why this is being presented to a medical audience, because the understanding of human genome made it possible to understand exactly who we are, where we came from, when we came. And that's the topic of today's talk. As John Lennon sang, I believe in yesterday, this is a story of thousands and thousands of yesterdays. Thousands and thousands of questions of survival, survival of the fittest, survival of fittest races, fittest genomes, fittest mutations, and survival in terribly cold climates, survival in terribly hot sun, and adapting to it. The clues about who we are strewn across archaeology, linguistics, anthropology, population genetics. Archaeology is, studying of old ruins and going there and checking, making carbon dating. Linguistics is basically which language resembles what. For example, Sanskrit and German have so many things common. If I say one Bollywood sentence today, it would have one Turkish word, one Iranian word, one Sanskrit word, and so on and so forth, because the languages have picked up different kinds of influences. Anthropology is measuring bones, measuring skulls, changes in them, and dating them. And finally, population genetics is basically using the human genome and the knowledge that came from it, putting a timestamp on many, many, many yesterdays. So before we go into it, I know some of you, this may seem very simplistic, but some of you may not know much about genomes. And so it's simple, it's important. It's totally needed to follow the story. So as the chimpanzee, several thousand, maybe million years ago, started to go from crawl to a walk, to a straight walk, to eventually walk straight without any kind of support. And he grew from being a chimpanzee to a human being. It lost a chromosome. As it lost a chromosome, the Homo species began. It lost a chromosome, single chromosome loss. There's only one chromosome difference between a chimpanzee in the jungle and the Homo species, Homo erectus, the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, and of course us, the Homo sapiens, our family. All of them separate from chimpanzee by a single chromosome. 95% of the DNA of a chimpanzee is same as human beings. We have 5% difference that made us who we are. Let's look at chromosomes. We have 44 autosomes and 2 sex chromosomes. There are 22 pairs of autosomes. Now, this is very interesting and crucial to understand. When A marries B, can you all hear me? All right. When A marries B and they have the first child, there is a 50-50 mix of genes from father and mother. So this is the so-called Lion hypothesis. So let's say an embryo is formed, it pulls 50% from one gene, pulls 50% from the other parent. If the mother is like singer like Lata Mangeshkar and the father is a great cricketer like Sachin Tendulkar, and they have 4 children, maybe one may be a cricketer, one may sing well, one may sing as well as play cricket well, and the 4th one neither plays cricket nor can sing because those genes were not sliced and diced into him or her. So in the Lion hypothesis is not exactly 100%. It is basically 40 to 60%. So there is a mixture of genes which are kind of, some are dominant, some are not. Blue eyes go this way, height goes this way, short-sightedness goes this way, etc. The other interesting thing about the chromosomal mixture at birth is that this randomness continues, so that if you think about it 1,000,000 times happening, the genes kind of travel in a fluid way and they are basically there. But along with them, mutations travel also. Genes are like computer code. There are errors that happen along the way. And those errors travel also down the stream. The errors, suppose certain gene mutated 55,000 years ago, then subsequent progeny of that particular person carry that gene. So you can actually take that gene and then date it back saying, okay, these people began their story 55,000 years ago. The men have Y chromosomes. It's a simple, small, stupid chromosome because it's smaller. But the Y tells the story of the men. Y is basically fathers all the way. Y chromosomes, if you keep looking at it, it is my father to my father to my father to my father. Thousands of fathers, the genetic imprint is in the Y chromosome. It doesn't appear in the girls because this is a Y chromosome story. And Y chromosomes can tell you who the father was maybe 100 generations ago. It could have been Ved Vyas who wrote Ramayana or Mahabharata, or it could be Genghis Khan, it could be Einstein, or it could be Stalin. One doesn't. The Y chromosome is mercilessly honest about where the male genes traveled. Y chromosome is a story of invasions, plunder, rape, destruction of men, and taking women as slaves. Y chromosome is the question of affairs and legitimate marriage, illegitimate affairs, child born in a marriage but of somebody else. The Y chromosome is a story of the fatherly inheritance. Y chromosome does help in the population genetics, but not as much as the maternal chromosome. The maternal chromosome, men and women carry their mothers in mDNA. But the women carry their DNA memory of their EU mom, the original EU mom, in the mitochondrial DNA. So, what so far we talked about the autosomes and the sex chromosome, they are in the nucleus. But the mitochondria, which are the powerhouses, which convert chemicals into energy, ADP, ADP, and the cells function because of that. It's a powerhouse. Every cell has its own powerhouse that powers that cell. If my heart is beating 80 times a minute, every cardiac cell is powered by the mitochondria. And the mitochondria have their own genes. These mitochondrial genes are inherited from mother to mother to mother in an undiluted manner. Thousands of years, but the mother's gene does not get changed, altered, or diluted. It's a maternal blessing. આશીર્વાદ જે માના કહેવાય દીકરીઓને મળે એ દીકરીઓને જ મળે. ડોબા જેવા દીકરાઓના બધું બદલાતું જાય, પણ દીકરીઓમાં undiluted from the Eve end of comes of these genes. This is the most significant part of why we are able to timestamp each population. So we have all heard "Mere paas maa hai," right? The Shashi Kapoor, Amitabh Bachchan story. The Mere paas maa hai. Every woman from the early Homo sapien who carried maybe a club in her hand to a throwing spear to a somewhat modern 100 years ago, and now with an iPhone, each one carries their mother and their mother. If this was the mother, all four mothers are with this young lady with an iPhone. And that is the mitochondrial DNA. The mitochondrial DNA will stamp the female inheritance thousands of years into their background. So what is molecular clock? Molecular clock is fairly interesting. Let me move all these pictures which are blocking my slide. All right. So molecular clock methods are a set of techniques used in evolution biology, population genetics to estimate timing of divergence events or rate of mutation over time. They are based on the idea that genetic mutations occur at a relatively constant rate similar to ticking of a clock. So every X thousand years, a mutation is likely to occur. Every 100 years, there's a constant rate, and those rate has been measured. And if you know the mutations, you can go back and see when it began. And if you can go back and see when it began, you know that an individual that is sitting in front of you, or individual whose DNA you have now gleaned from a 1,000-year-old, 5,000-year-old fossil, you can timestamp them and take them wherever they are. You can also see who else has similar genetic mutations. So not only is timestamp, but it's a stamp of their journey. Molecular clock methods have been used to estimate divergence times in species, including humans and other primates, as well to track the evolutionary journey of viruses such as HIV. They help researchers understand important evolutionary events, such as when a particular gene or trait enters into the system. I'm missing the last words because you guys' pictures are blocking my slide. Nonetheless, so who are we? Where did we get here? So the truth of the matter is we are all out of Africa. We left Africa 70,000 years ago. Arabia was the first stop, and last stop was Americas 16,000 years ago. So the last of the out of Africa people over the Siberia and the north into Alaska and Canada entered 16,000 years ago, much before Columbus. That's who the Native Americans were. That's who the Incas were. That's who everybody else in the Northern and Southern American hemisphere were. We reached India 65,000 years ago. We took 5,000 years going from Africa to India, 5,000 years. The class of 65,000 years, which is us, 60,000 years BCE. Now, we don't say AD, and BCE is before Common Era, and Common Era, CE is 00. So 65,000 years before Common Era, they share 99.9% of DNA. Just for a moment, dwell on this fact. The entire class out of Africa, that left Africa 65,000 years ago and went to America, became Red Indians, Europe, Siberia, Japan, China, India, Australia, the Aboriginals there, the Maoris, they all share 99.9% of DNA, just 0.1% difference. The migration began from, it's believed to be the southern parts of Africa, and it went into the Middle East area, which is somewhere near the Greece, Macedonia, etc. Also the Central Asian area, the Western Siberia, Kazakhstan. And there it lingered for a while, and then the two streams broke apart. One went into north and established residences in Europe, and one went towards south and arrived in India. And as I said, this story took 5,000 years for those who first arrived in India. These are called early Indians or ancient Indians. The original Eve. Who was the original Eve? Who was the mother of the mother of the mother? That concept has changed. So, you may think there was one woman whose mitochondrial DNA is into everybody else, but original Eve has changed and will keep on changing. Just think about it. Let's say if Miss A was original Eve and she had 3 daughters, B, C, and D. Let's say 2 had no progeny survive. One families got caught up in war and everybody perished. One suffered plague or some other infection and no survivors to say that B or C existed. But D passed on her genes to her daughters and then to her daughters, and they survived. And so for all modern humans now, Homo sapiens, who are present today on earth, D becomes the new Eve, even though A was the Eve some time ago. So as the lineages disappear, the Eve changes. And the original Eve is not present at the same time original Adam existed. The proof is that the carbon dating and the genomic dating has put the original Adam, the Y chromosome father, who has been identified as a lineage giver to all of us, is much older in time than the original Eve. Maybe subsequent research in future, maybe some other fossil somewhere, will find another Eve that is much older than D, but currently there is one place where this lineage stops. So while the biblical story may say there was Adam and Eve, original Adam and original Eve did not exist at the same time. That's the Eve and Adam in genomic terms are different people. So out of Africa happened 65,000 years ago, we arrived. Then came the glacial period. Glacial period is like we keep talking about the climate change. A phenomenal climate change took over the world from 29,000 to 12,000 years BCE. This is 15,000 years. And it was so bad. It was so bad that whoever had reached, they couldn't go anywhere else. They couldn't keep connections with other families that may have moved in other directions. Whoever stayed wherever, they just stayed put there. Just remember that fact. If somebody had reached Europe, they really lost touch with Middle East or India. Somebody was stuck in India. They had no way of having any touch, any further migration. For those 15,000 years, migration stopped completely. Agriculture then, 12,000 years ago, and some arrivals started to happen 9,000 years ago. This is the Neolithic era. Then happened the steppe migration, 7,000 years ago, 7,000 BCE. And these are people with metallurgy. They had developed metal, iron. They had spears and they had arrowheads, which gave them some superiority in war. They had horses, and so they could move in a group. They didn't have to walk thousands of miles to go conquer another land. And so the steppe migration started to happen when they could cultivate horses for a large scale move. And they had metallurgy, so that the other people had wooden spears, and these people now had a metal tipped weapons. And of course, the defeat of those who were facing them was going to be certain. And finally, the oceanic migration happened in last millennia, which is the story of the Asia Pacific. So the original humans, as they arrived in this wonderful land, they arrived in different caravans. They came at different times. They came 65,000 years ago. They came 12,000 years ago. They came 7,000 years ago. They came 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. And this is much before the Muslims or the Mongol invasions. That's all part of the current story. This is the history. The difference between history and prehistory is this. History is when something is written about it. When you write something about it, that becomes history. It's written record. Things which are not written are prehistoric. So in our case, our history starts 2,000 to 3,000 years ago in terms of having actual documentation of thoughts and intelligent processes. But our history is actually much older. Harappans wrote things. We just don't know the Harappan language, so their tablets and edicts are uninterpreted. So we have a written history, 7,000 to 10,000 year old, but we just can't read it yet. Nobody has deciphered the Harappan language yet. So we come to Harappans. This is between 2600 and 1900 BCE. Who were they? Where did they go? If you ever visit Dholavira, it's a phenomenal feeling to know that these are our ancestors and these were there 2,000 to 3,000 before BCE. So the first farmers that came into this system became a remarkable civilization. They're called first farmers because they were the ones who developed farming techniques. And once you develop farming techniques, you no longer were hunter-gatherers. You didn't have to go and hunt or gather fruits or nuts to eat. You could cultivate and you could store, and your children could eat. And the populations grew because if you could store food, you could have more children. The hunter-gatherers couldn't afford to have more children because they simply ate what they collected or killed that day. So the farmers that developed farming, and this farming was happening all over at that time. It wasn't something unique to India, but everywhere people had started to think about how to cultivate different things. And in different parts of the world, different things were being farmed. But in our area, the Harappan civilization became one of the most glorious, most busy. If you think India is one of the most populated countries right now, in Harappan times, it was the most populated part of the earth at that time. There were more people there than anywhere else. Harappan script, as I said, is not translated yet. There are lots of things there, but nobody has been able to read. There are European linguistic experts who have spent their entire life. I read a book about somebody who spent 65 years trying to read Harappan text and died without ever cracking the code. The Harappan civilization arose independently from Mesopotamia. So at that time, Euphrates and Tigris, there was another civilization growing, not as large as Harappan, but independent. They had no connection, and they basically didn't depend on each other. They traded with each other. There's proof that these two civilizations traded. This arose from first Indians who came 65,000 years ago. And it also arose from farmers from Iran who had migrated down and mated with the existing ancient Indians. They spoke Elamite, which came from Elam. So Iranian language called Elamite, which is no longer in Iran now, but it came into Harappa. And eventually it slipped down. When Harappa ended, it slipped down into south and became mother of Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, and Kannada. So as Sanskrit was arriving from north and became the predominant language that will give birth to Gujarati and Bengali and Hindi and Odia, Elamite language moved from Harappa as Harappa was closing and became Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, and Kannada. That's why south of India, languages to them sound alike and for us very difficult because they are difficult. And the tragedy of Elamite is that except for South India, the language doesn't exist anywhere else. Iran subsequently developed Persian, but it didn't have even a drop of Elamite. As the Harappans eventually died because Harappa area got a drought. All over the world, Mesopotamia suffered, everybody suffered. Just as the glacial period, 15,000 years lasting, so everybody suffered at that time. This drought where there was no water and nothing to cultivate hit most of the earth, and Harappa basically became unlivable. In any case, it was in areas which are close to deserts, in near Haryana, in Iran, in Pakistan, and in Kutch. So Harappans started to move, and those that went down mated with the ancient Indians in south, and those who went up in north mated with the steppe people who had come from north. So Harappans basically divided into two streams, and eventually the civilization disappeared, but people disappeared into the northerners and southerners. So if you think of Elamite moving into southern India and taking over 4 language developments, Sanskrit had arrived as a Indo-European language with the steppe people. But when the final Sanskrit, so the Rigveda Sanskrit, if you see, is pretty different than the subsequent Sanskrit that developed with grammar and other inputs. Rigveda Sanskrit has so much similarities to German language as such. It's guttural, it's got same retroflex consonants. But the subsequent Sanskrit that we understand as Sanskrit, and where most of our Vedas are written, where most of our Quran is written, with the kings promoted and the Brahmins spoke, that is a subsequent Sanskrit. So 3/4 of the Indians speak Gujarati, Hindi, Bengali, Punjabi, Marathi. It all comes from Sanskrit. Spanish, English, French, Portuguese, Persian, Russian, German are also Indo-European languages and owe their roots to the same language that gave rise, the Proto-Indo-European that gave rise to Sanskrit. Some people say that maybe Sanskrit spread from India because it all began here 5,000, 10,000 years ago. That's not really true. Out of India did not happen. Indians have a gene called R1A, which is present in higher caste Hindus and Indo-Europeans. That gene basically originated in Western Siberia and ended up in India and Northern India. And it is nowhere else to be found. It is a gene that is uniquely present with us. So the proof is that if the R1 cannot be found anywhere else, in Middle East or in Europe, the reverse migration did not happen over the 65,000 years. Which brings me to Romas. You may have seen European pictures where there are gypsies. They thought they were from Egypt, so they called them Egyptians, Egyptians, but they were Romas. And now the Italians have Romas, and they call them Romas. They wear colorful clothes, they sing, they dance, they stay outside the cities. They're sometimes accused of shoplifting or stealing. Wonderful people. But they are all Punjabis. They came from Punjab. They all carry R1 gene. So if you ask me, who has R1 gene outside India? Only these Romas, the gypsies. Asi Punjabi. They are all basically Punjabis who left Punjab, fled from Punjab when the Muslim invasion started. And these are the people who went up and spread all over Middle East and then Europe and into Russia. They may have fled the Mongolian invasions, the Genghis Khan, Tughlaq Khan, Timur Lung, etc., or Muslim invasions. They fled in small groups, but maintained their music. Their language has our languages, Sanskrit, and the Romanian language. So the Romani language the Roma speak is kind of a mixture of, and they picked up on their way, they picked up words from Persian, words from Turkish, words from, so their language has, so things common like Maidan, which is a Turkish word. We say Maidan and everybody knows that we are talking about a ground. The Romas will know what is a Maidan. If we say Insaf, the Insaf is a Turkish word. But Romas also, when they are harassed in Italy by Italian police, their slogan is Insaf, 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 because they basically are saying they need Insaf. And Insaf is a word they carried on their way from Punjab. These are the only Europeans who share a gene with us. This is how they spread from India. And these are the years in which they spread. The gypsy migrations kept on happening. There are also gypsies that eventually reached the Americas. So who were tribals? This is where I was completely wrong. All my life, I basically thought that when the people arrived, Aryans arrived, others arrived, tribals must have always been there. These are the people who are original people of India. This is where their genes must be, and these are the aboriginals of India, and they have never left anywhere. But when they're genetically examined, they are exactly us. They are tribals are us. Scheduled castes are us, Brahmins are us. When the Aryans arrived, because they had arrived maybe 40,000 years after the first Indians arrived, they stayed in the northern climates and the Aryans were fair. And the people they encountered were dark and had different looks, and they were all called Rakshasas. When the Aryans with their rituals and Aryans with their Sanskrit mantras did yagnas, these people came to stop it. And they said, okay, Rakshaso, Avanma, Hadka Nakho avi gaya. But Rakshaso hota. They're also all people who were native, who were being threatened by these new outsiders who had arrived. The Aryans were outsiders, Sanskrit was outsider. Some of those languages that we speak, Kutchi, for example, etc., they were the amalgamation of Sanskrit into something very local. Kutchi, Sindhi, some of those languages rose from the ground and mixed up with Sanskrit. Think about it. So tribals are us. Hindus sort of classified the Varnas, but whether it was a Brahmin or Kshatriya or Rajput or scheduled caste, they're all us, 99.9% similar Homo sapiens, all out of Africa. The Rakshasas who fought the brave Aryan princes, probably Ravan was us and Ram was us. The tribals who were found to live on trees were thought to be monkeys, and all the followers of Hanuman were us. They were Homo sapiens who just lived in jungles and had a lot of hair on their body and were genetically looking different, but they were genetically similar. Think about it, Gauri and Prithviraj were genetically brothers, just different faiths. Now, China is a funny country. China thinks that everything began in China. The Chinese basically actually are exactly us. They are brothers from a different father. Their migrations came from Mongolia and Russia into China. And the languages that evolved in China are totally different. And they spread they're called Austronesian languages, and they spread from China into Tibet, Burma, Pacific Islands. And there are languages in Mizo area, in Arunachal Pradesh today, which are much similar to Chinese than any Indian languages you can find. So there was a linguistic expansion from China, and also people came from that area. So if you go towards northeast of India, towards Burma, the people start looking more and more Oriental because, yes, their genome has some stamp of having come from that side. So you see this ad everywhere, marital, a fair Saraswat Brahmin girl wanted, a IAS fair boy looking for so fair. How did this idea arise that fair was better, that dark was not so better, that dark was to be discriminated against? When I was growing up, there were powders available which people applied to look fairer, and there were creams available that made you fairer, and of course, fairer that was better. And that has been our history for a few thousand years, that the people who arrived subsequently and were of the fairer skin basically looked down on people who were darker and said, you are darker. And that same racism we faced when we go to Britain or US, where the whites look at you and say, oh, you are brown, you must be inferior to us. That whole thinking that white is better than, we also adopted it brilliantly. Our people who went to Africa, looked at all the Africans and basically said, we are more like Europeans, we're at least fairer than these guys. So the whole idea of this basically came when the later 5,000, 7,000 years of the entry that came, those were the people who had stayed in colder climates much longer, and they obviously were fairer. And they discriminated against those who were local and called them Rakshasas, called them, all kinds of things. An Indian village, this is the most interesting thing I found in the last 5-6 months. An Indian village has more genetic diversity, more genetic tribes than Ukraine or Siberia, which are 4,000 kilometers apart, because Brahmins marry Brahmins and Patels marry Patels. Even within Patels, Kadwa won't marry the non-Kadwa patidars. So there is tremendous endogamy. And so in a single village, you will see 10, 20, 30, 40 tribes. Whereas in Eastern and Western Europe, there's not that much difference in genetics because people intermarry. Between Ireland and Hungary, there is a single tribe, but in an Indian village, you will see 20 tribes. So this is the diversity we have, and we have created this diversity by, marrying within narrower and narrower parameters, with the result that we genetically inherit diseases which are common within certain groups, and also the differentiation begins because people marry differently. So India is full of tribes. Radha kyun gori, main kyun kala. That depends on where were you for 15,000 years. People, when the glacial age hit the planet, whoever was wherever, they got stuck there. The skin color and the time spent in steppes or Europe, it all became intermingled. If you were stuck for 15,000 years in Europe or in Greece, where there was not this hot a sun, your skin adapted, your mutations adapted, and you could not stand that sun because you basically did not need to, and you had to bear tremendous cold. So the entire time, the 29,000 to 14,000 BCE, nobody migrated anywhere. Mutations to adapt temperature took thousands of years, but that's why the south of India is so dark and Kashmir is so fair, because it's a question of who stayed where for how many thousands of years. The newcomers were fair and they thought they were superior. It's just a question of where were you stuck for the glacial time. China's versus India's billions, their billion, we have billion, we are all billionaires, not just Ambanis and Adanis. The countries themselves are billionaires. 1 billion Chinese versus 1 billion Indians. Indian genes are split into many tribes. There's only one Han Chinese gene signature. The entire country, because of intermarriage and not having the kind of Varnas, entire country has one genomic signature. We have hundreds of signatures. India has endogamy, segregation, isolation. So for reaching China's type equilibrium, where population all looks alike, you need large population size to minimize the genetic drift, and you need random mating. People must mate randomly without preference for particular genotypes, so that there is no selective pressure acting on specific alleles which get amplified. So I think this is the reason why we are a country of tribes and China is a sort of a uniform country. Good or bad, I don't know, but that's the story. So Chinese type languages, genetics, rise, it's the last 4,000 years. Last 4,000 years, the Austro-Asiatic languages follow land route to India, coming from China, coming from Burma. Harappa was ending at this time. Southeast Asia connection has heavy Y male chromosome, which means the women were basically taken either as sexual partners or wives, or the husbands were killed and taken as slaves. The entire Southeast Asia connection has the male chromosome is very similar to the Han Chinese chromosome in certain ways, which means men arrived and mixed with local women. It doesn't always have to be invasion and death. It also is that single men arrived for farming and subsequently they mated with local women. Southeast Asia connection is lost in maternal DNA, which all of the mothers were of the same origin. So the men, the Y chromosomes are different. The mitochondrial DNA is same. And that's with them came the rice farming into India. My computer is stuck. Excuse me. So we are like a pizza. This is the last few slides. How are we all made? The base is made of the out of Africa, 70,000 years BCE, first Indians. Sauce, the tomato sauce is Harappans, they spread all over, south or north. Cheese is Aryans, they came later. And toppings are all kinds, Greeks, Huns, Sakas, or Burmese, etc. It's a tasty pizza because there's so much variety, so many palates, diverse constituents. So finally, who we are? We are all Harappans, they're all migrants. We just came in on different time caravans. We are even a bit Neanderthals and a wee bit Denisovans, not just Homo sapiens. As we left Africa, we mated with the Neanderthals who subsequently became extinct. We mated with Denisovans who subsequently became extinct, but we have their genes. We have so many things like skin color, food allergies, milk intolerance, customs, which are determined by who we married, and where we were. And that's where I end my presentations. The session is open to questions.
Thank you, Divyesh bhai. Simply very fascinating story of Homo sapiens, how we came from where we came from. It actually matches with the tagline of G20 summit being held in India, where Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is the tagline. So I think your presentation more or less tells us the same thing, that we are all from a common pool, and the times have affected how we have progressed so far. So thank you very much, Divyesh bhai. And I would like to know about what are the various references, how much you have read about for making this presentation.
So I think largely these two books, then of course Mother Google, but there's a book called Early Indians by Tony Joseph, which is the fundamental book that I reviewed for Baroda Book Browsers Club 2-3 months ago. And that Tony Joseph is a journalist, but for last 10-12 years, he has been researching this area. And there another book is by a book called Selfish Gene by a guy named Richard Dawkins. Selfish Gene is brilliant because it basically tells you the story of Darwin and what he discovered. It almost seems like a fantasy science fiction story, but actually every page is real. And Dawkins provided me the background to understand this subject. And of course, Early Indians provided me with the numbers, the diagrams and graphs. And as I said, all the paintings are mine. So that basically gave me inspiration to create some paintings around the theme.
Great. That was one talent which I did not know about. You are a multi-talent. So over to others. I mean, there are many who would like to make comments or ask questions. Yes, over to the audience. Yes, Jagdish.
Divyesh bhai, Sapiens by Yuval Harari.
Yes, I've read that.
You have read that?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. That traces the history of mankind.
Yes. That I had read many years ago, but at that time, I had not developed interest to focus on what he was saying. So the very complex technical part, I would kind of keep going. And I also read it when I was practicing still. So the free time to understand these things were not there. Now the pleasure was that I would come to a point where I'm completely lost, and then I would get into ChatGPT or something and ask them a question saying, how did R1 gene impact the Brahmins in India? And suddenly the artificial intelligence would give me an article, and suddenly I have data that I could otherwise not get. So and I have time to do that now. So that was much more fun.
Divyesh?
Any other questions? Yeah.
My request is that you broaden the boundaries of this particular topic and take it in our 75-year celebration as lectures.
My pleasure.
Right?
I would love to do that. Yeah.
Fine. Good.
Yeah, Hemant.
Divyesh bhai, this was India's history, and the information can be divided in the last millennium, 1000 years, and before that. Today, Rakhi Gadi from Haryana, because my brother is an eminent geologist working with the director of Indian Institute of Science, our home is full of discussion on this. That is why I can contribute something. That Rakhi Gadi from Haryana has proven that this Aryan theory invasion from Africa is not correct. For 100,000 years, the genes of DNA have been proved by Dr. Shinde and Dr. Rai from the Bhishma Sahani Institute of Paleosciences in Lucknow and Deccan College. The second point is, Bhimbetka cave paintings are showing horses and elephants and all sort of animals already there 100,000 years before the Western scholar books are showing. They are ignoring these facts. The third thing is, even in today's Times of India, there is an article on how today's Parsi is. Now, third point, my my point is on epigenetics. How epigenetics changes this and misguides those people who are stuck in one frame of mind or one benchmark. In cancer, we have learned how epigenetic changes even the mitochondrial DNA or each DNA. So the story of Bhishma marrying a fisherwoman and millions of such stories breaks the cliche that previously the Indians were herded into only marriages between the herds. That is completely wrong. This is the theory of 1,000 years, last 1,000 years or 100, 200 years. So my question is that paleosciences people have already proved that today's Parsis have the ancient Iranian genes, which are not there in today's Persians, Iranian, but they have Gujarati genes. Now, Parsis have never ordinarily married with Gujaratis or anything. But these epigenetic changes because of staying in Gujarat for 1,000 years have changed it. They are showing Gujarati genes. So what is your answer to that, sir?
So because I'm not a archaeologist or a population geneticist, I won't enter into this controversy. The Tony Joseph's book, there's a lot of controversy about the Haryana discovery, and basically in his book, in his current edition, he basically goes into that discovery, which some people say it suggests that the idea that Aryans came from north and populated India is wrong. He presents evidence that suggests that it is exactly opposite, and he also quotes people who actually wrote the original article and said that their particular interpretation is consonant with this theory. But again, you're right. There are controversies there. The population genetics is interpreted within the limits of the science. It's a new science. The human genome was decoded 20 years ago. Suddenly we have time stamping techniques which are being used to create these theories. Bulk of what I have read is basically suggests that, and you're right, I must add that the Bhishma marrying fisherwoman. So the proof of the pudding is that even though the Brahmins thought that they were trying to maintain their purity and the Rajputs thought actually Indian genome is such that everybody has every genome. The North Indians have certain more genomes of the steppe Aryan people, and South Indians have more genomes of the early Indians who came 65,000 years ago. But everybody, even South and North, Sri Lanka and Kashmir have such identity of genomes that intermarriages took place, relations outside marriage took place. Human nature is human nature, and so a lot of these intermixture happened. Even though Joseph's book says that around 100 or 200, 300 years BCE, suddenly the endogamy became much more stricter. Until then, the previous 1,000 years, there was tremendous admixture. People were marrying very freely. I find it very hard to believe. I think it came slowly and became more and more structurally solidified. I don't think it suddenly happened around 200-300 years BCE, but I can't find any evidence to support my thinking there. I think you rightly point out that there are other streams of evidence that suggest there is this current thought in India that it is more political, more religious, more social, that we really didn't come from anywhere. We Swayambhu, 5,000, 10,000 years ago, we arose here and we gave everybody everything everywhere. Sanskrit moved from here to there. Evidence is against that. Evidence genomically is that everything began from Africa 71,000 years ago, 65,000 years ago, the first Indians arrived. And that evidence is irrefutable. The other things about Aryans, whether they came 2,000 years ago or 7,000 years ago, and who they were and where they came from, or they suddenly arose on Ganges from some miracle and then spread all over. That argument has more social political dimensions than the genomic proofs that I have seen. And again, I am going by the 2-3 books that I have followed. I have not gone to the original articles in Nature and Cell because I cannot interpret those articles. I mean, I know genetics because I'm an oncologist, but I don't know that much genetics that I can read what those people are trying to say. It's very boring and different kind of literature. So what you're saying may have some truth.
Thank you, Divyesh bhai, for this clarification. Now, Dr. Jagdish Sinappa from Bangalore wants to say something. Yes, Dr. Jagdish.
Thank you, sir, for a very enlightening and wonderful talk. Just as you were mentioning in your last sentence, there is an article in Nature just about maybe a week back, which talks about how we were nearly pushed to extinction, and we had the total population landed just at about 1,200 and did not expand for almost close to almost 100,000 years. It's a very interesting article which has just come out in Nature, and it's on how the humans evolved from Africa. Very interesting. Second thing is also I wanted to. This is an article in Nature last week.
And do they timestamp it around what time that happened?
So what they say is 900,000 years ago, ancestors of modern humans were pushed to the brink of extinction because the breeding population dropped dramatically, and it dropped to just about 1,280 and didn't expand for almost another 117,000 years. So this is much before than what we know about. So there is obviously there is a lot of environmental issues which are going to determine the movement of races and determination. So that is point one. Point number two, which I wanted to make is while all the Dravidian groups are put together, like Malayalam, Tamil, Kannada, Andhra Pradesh, etc., the one race which seems to be very distinct from all this is the Tamilian race, because their dialect, their the way in which they write is entirely different from the rest of the population of this country. So I don't know whether there is a uniformity in the Iranian movement to South India, or whether there has been also some indigenous people who came from elsewhere, because there is a gross difference in this, and in fact there's a lot of Tamil literature on that.
Interesting, because what I've read basically even suggests that not only people who came 65,000 years ago from Middle East, who had already come from Africa, came into India, but by 59,000, so 6,000 years later, because the continents were kind of together, they had crossed over into Australia and New Zealand. And the original people that are seen, not the Europeans who came in last 1,000 years, but the original people who are seen in the New Zealand and Australia have again the same genomic stamp that the Southern Indian and the Harappans have. And so those are our brothers and sisters from another era. They came on a different caravan and ended up somewhere else. But I found that totally fascinating.
Yes, sir. And last point is your paintings are just beautiful. Congratulations.
Thank
and
you.
I hope that we learn from you on that too.
So thank you, Jagdish and Hemant bhai and Jagdish bhai, for all your inputs and wonderful interactions. So it's 9 o'clock and we end the meeting here. Thank you, Divyesh bhai, once again. We look forward to more talks in future. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you all. We meet next Saturday morning again. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.